All right, jumping right in. Today, trauma healing.
Yeah.
It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Trauma healing. And it's something that I think a lot of people, either personally have
Hmm.
dealt with or
Right.
know some. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of everywhere, right?
That, yeah.
So we've got this excerpt here, and it's about trauma healing.
Oh, yeah.
And I know, right? There's a typo. Maybe we should.
Little Freudian slip there.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. We got to lighten up when we talk about this stuff sometimes, right?
Right.
But, before we even get into healing, I'm curious, what even is trauma? It feels like. It's a word that gets tossed around a lot,
I
and
know.
it's almost lost its meaning.
Yeah.
What is it really?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think, the word trauma is definitely used a lot these days, and I think it's important to kind of really clarify and define it, right? And when we talk about trauma, we're really talking about an experience that overwhelms a person's ability to cope.
Mm.
And it can range from, a single incident like a car accident or a natural disaster.
Right.
That would be what we call acute trauma.
Okay.
But then you also have chronic trauma. So that would be something like, ongoing exposure to domestic violence or, living in a war zone. So it's that repeated exposure to something. And then, another category would be complex trauma. And that's often, stemming from multiple traumatic events, particularly in childhood.
Wow. So it's not just like one big event, right? It can be this kind of
Exactly.
ongoing
Right.
thing, too, which I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize it can be.
It can be very insidious. And the thing about trauma is it can show up in so many different ways for different people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
How does it, we talk about the word, but how? Does it actually affect
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
in their lives?
Right.
Day
Yeah.
to day, all that.
Well, and I think that's what the source is really pointing to, is that there can be a lot of different mental and emotional impacts. I mean, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD is a big one, right?
Right.
We hear about that a lot. But you also have anxiety disorders, depression, substance abuse can be tied into this. It can really wreak havoc on your emotional well-being and, your sense of self, your relationships, all of that.
So it's not just like you have a flashback and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a
Right.
whole life.
No, it's pervasive.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think, the source is really focusing on the mental and emotional side, which is, of course, incredibly important. But, it's also worth mentioning that there can be physical health impacts as well, right?
Interesting.
Chronic pain, autoimmune disorders, even heart disease has been linked to, unaddressed trauma. So it really highlights how interconnected our mind and body are and how trauma can, really kind of throw things off balance.
Yeah. It really shows you how complex this whole thing is, right? It's
Yeah.
not just one thing. And when we talk about
It's multifaceted.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when we talk about healing, I mean, this source throws a lot at us, right?
Yeah.
Like CBT, EMDR,
Yeah.
somatic experiencing, mindfulness, meditation.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I mean, where do we even start?
It can be overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's also kind of a good thing because it means that there are options, right? There are different paths to healing. And so the important thing is to find what resonates with you, what works for you, and that's where working with a therapist can be really helpful. They can kind of help you navigate all of these different approaches. I mean, for example, you have something like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is kind of a mouthful, but essentially, it uses eye movements to help process traumatic memories. And that can be really helpful for people who are struggling with, flashbacks or nightmares. Or you have something like somatic experiencing, which focuses on the body, right?
Oh, interesting.
So it's about really kind of understanding how trauma gets trapped in the body and finding ways to release that tension. And that can be really helpful for people who are experiencing, physical symptoms of trauma like chronic pain or anxiety.
So it's not just about talking about it. It's like
Right.
actually
Exactly.
feeling it in the
Yeah.
body.
It's about that mind-body connection. And then you have things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really about, kind of challenging those negative thought patterns that can come up after trauma, right?
Yeah, I can see how that's
Yeah.
important.
Right. It's about reframing those thoughts and, finding more helpful ways of coping. And of course, mindfulness and meditation can be incredibly powerful tools for managing anxiety, for staying present, and for cultivating that sense of inner peace.
So it's like this whole toolkit And you got to find
Yeah, exactly.
tools.
It's about finding the right fit. It's not one size fits all. It's about like, okay, what do I need in this moment? What's going to help me, kind of move through this and heal?
And it sounds like that's where a therapist really comes in handy.
Absolutely. I mean, a therapist can really help you figure out, what approaches might be most beneficial for you, your specific needs, your goals.
And this is making me think, it's not just about therapy, right? I mean, this source talks about support systems too, which seems like a big part of it. What do you think about that?
I think it's huge. Therapy is definitely one piece of the puzzle, but having those support systems in place outside of therapy can make a world of difference. And, things like peer support groups can be incredibly powerful. Being able to connect with others who truly get it, who've been there, can be so validating, so empowering.
Right, because when you talk to people who haven't experienced that, sometimes it's like,
Oh,
I don't quite get.
It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
And even if they're well-intentioned, it can feel like, yeah, you just don't quite understand. But to be in a room with people who have walked a similar path,
Yeah.
it can be life-changing. And then, of course, the role of family and community can't be overstated. Having loved ones who are supportive, who listen without judgment, who offer practical help, can really kind of create that sense of safety and security that's so essential for healing, But it's also important to acknowledge that not everyone has access to those supports,
Right.
or feels comfortable with them, and that's okay too. It's about finding what works for you, what feels safe and supportive for you.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that it's
Yeah.
not one size fits all, right? It's a very individual.
It's a journey.
Yeah. And the source also talks about self-care, which seems pretty important. What are some of those things, and why do you think they're so important?
Yeah. Self-care is often seen as this kind of like, fluffy pampering thing, right? But when it comes to trauma healing, it's so much more than that. It's really about reclaiming your sense of agency, your sense of power, And the source highlights, things like physical activity, creative expression, and a healthy lifestyle. And these are all really powerful tools for healing. I mean, physical activity, right? Whether it's, going for a run, dancing, doing yoga, whatever it is that gets you moving, it releases endorphins, it reduces stress, it can help you feel more connected to your body, which, after trauma, that connection can be really fragmented. So it's about kind of re-inhabiting your body and feeling that sense of strength and vitality.
I could see how that would be helpful, yeah.
Right. And then creative expression, whether it's through art, music, writing, whatever speaks to you, it can be such a powerful way to process emotions that are maybe difficult to put into words.
Yeah, and not have to talk about it necessarily.
Exactly. It's a nonverbal way of expressing and releasing, and, and sometimes that can be really healing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a healthy lifestyle, prioritizing sleep, nourishing your body with nutritious foods, incorporating relaxation techniques. All of these things are really about building a strong foundation for healing. It's about taking care of yourself, showing yourself that you're worthy of care.
You're rebuilding that relationship with yourself.
Exactly.
That might have been damaged.
It's about that self-love, that self-compassion.
Yeah, and there's this one part in here that's really sticking with me, and it's the idea of integrating the trauma into your life story.
Yeah, that's a big one.
How do you even do that?
Well, and that's the thing, right? It is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not about minimizing or erasing the past, It's about finding meaning in the experience, understanding how it shaped you, and using that understanding to move forward with greater self-awareness and compassion. And it can be really challenging, but it can also be incredibly empowering,
Yeah, kind of like taking ownership of it in a way.
Yes, it is. It's about reclaiming your story. And it's not about saying, oh, this was a good thing that happened. It's about saying, okay, this happened. This is part of my story. How did it shape me? And how can I use this experience to grow and to help others?
And I would imagine that's where, a trauma-informed therapist is.
Absolutely, because that can be really tricky terrain to navigate on your own, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
having that support, having that guidance from someone who understands trauma, who can help you process those experiences and, and really kind of integrate them into your life story in a healthy way, that's so important.
It's been a really interesting deep dive, I got to say. I feel like, the big takeaway is that it's not a destination. It's
a journey.
Journey, right?
Yeah.
And there's no one right way to do it.
Yeah.
It's about finding what works for you.
And I think that's a really important message to emphasize because, sometimes we can get caught up in this idea that there's a right way to heal, a right timeline.
All right?
And it's just not true.
Yeah, you can't compare your journey to somebody else's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone's experience is unique. Everyone's path to healing is unique. And I think it's important to honor that, to be patient with yourself and to really kind of trust the process.
Trust the process, yeah. And I guess that leaves me with the question of, like, if we really understand trauma, how does that change how we interact with others, Because everybody's going through something.
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been great. And remember, you're not alone. There's help out there, and you know you're strong even if you don't feel like it right now.
Absolutely.
Keep healing.
Keep going.